Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Going to Bat with Team Irie. This is episode number 48. This is our fourth episode we have done this year. We have done several others, 44 others, that you can go back to the foundation page and watch, or you can Google them on Google, of course, and go look up Going to Bat with Team Irie, and you can see a lot of the other videos, interviews that we have done. We do this to raise awareness for spinal cord injury research. We raise money for that. We also do high school scholarships here in Kentucky, raise awareness to the dangers of spinal cord injuries and preventing them. So today we are lucky enough to have Greg Litton. How you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here and appreciate it. And hopefully everything's going well in your world.
It is. And like I always say, no point in complaining because nobody listens anyway. So, I like that old, was it a Pixar movie, the Madagascar? Just smile and wave, boys, smile and wave.
Yep, that is very true. So we'll get right to the meat and potatoes of it, I guess, here and talk a little bit about your career and some baseball stuff here. You were a first round 10th pick player in 1984 in the Major League Draft by the San Francisco Giants, which I find pretty neat. If you can find some first rounders to talk to, that's always a good day. What do you think made you stand out as a player to be drafted so high?
I was one of those players, Dave. If you came and watched me play once or twice, you probably wouldn't think a whole lot unless I happened to have a great game. But to be honest with you, I was never the biggest, never the fastest, never the strongest. I think I was the type player, and it's funny. I remember when I was looking at signing from San Francisco to Seattle, and I was talking to Lou Piniella on the phone. And I remember telling Lou, I said, I kind of told him the same thing, but, he had seen me managing in Cincinnati. And, I just told him, I said, just give me a chance. First day in spring training, you're not going to jump up and down and be grateful you signed me. And I said, but just give me a chance to play every day and I'll show you I'm a winner. I do all the little things, and I'm going to run through that wall, or I'm going to run over whoever it takes, run through the fence. I'm going to do whatever it takes to win the game or help us win the game. And I think that's what my biggest asset was if they watched me for more than just a couple of games, they would see that, and that's what made me stand out.
Where did you go to high school and college? Did you go to college, or was you drafted right out of high school?
I was drafted out of junior college. I went to, I was living here, as I still do, in Pensacola, Florida. I went to a little high school called Woodham High School, not a very prominent baseball school. But I did grow up with a dad who was a high school football and baseball coach, and he was an all SEC baseball player himself at Mississippi State. And so I had good coaching growing up since I was a kid. And then I went to Pensacola Junior College here in town. And again, the whole story of my career, I wasn't out of high school considered to be drafted, scholarship offers much. I had a couple junior college offers and went here. And by the end of my sophomore year, I had also put on 20 pounds lifting weights, put 10 on my freshman year, 10 on my sophomore year. I didn't, not the old cheating steroids way, but by the end of my sophomore year, I was drafted in the first round, could have gone anywhere in the Southeast, and it signed a letter of intent. I was supposed to play with somebody I know at Mississippi State, Jeff Brantley, but I was supposed to play shortstop the year. They went to the World Series, had Palmeiro, Clark, Brantley, Thigpen, all those guys. And I ended up signing instead. I wanted to go so bad. But, looking at my career, going off to the SEC, your junior year is your biggest year. And I by no means didn't think I could compete there. I knew I could compete there, but, I was like, what if I have a little adjustment period or whatever, and don't put up the numbers that, and don't get drafted where I am now. my professional career might be hurt. So I just decided, the old bird in the hand, and decided to sign.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I know a lot of players, you know, go through the different college. They'll go to college routes. I know, they look at some of the SEC schools that are always powerful, and a lot of kids get drafted out of there and different things. But I know there's different routes getting drafted. Ed Ott, I was talking to him the other night, and his high school didn't even have a baseball team, and he got drafted out of high school, which I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is.
So you were born and raised in Louisiana?
No, I was born in New Orleans. I was actually adopted out in New Orleans. My parents, my dad, as I said, was played ball at Mississippi State when he was young. After he got out and he had a chance to sign, but his passion was coaching, and he coached for as long as he possibly could at whatever level. But he ended up he was stationed during the Korean War. He was he wasn't drafted. He enlisted to keep from being drafted, and that was back when sports was really big in the military. And somebody saw him and learned that he was a all SEC third baseman at Mississippi State. And this general, colonel, whatever it was, took him down to Panama, the Canal Zone, to basically play baseball for his team. And so he, instead of going to Korea, he went down to Panama and played baseball for 3 years and went back to Mississippi State, got into coaching after he graduated, and ended up getting a job. I don't know how he did this back before the internet days, but found out about a coaching job in Panama for the Civil Service High School. And he coached down there for like 21, 22 years. So that I grew up there till I was 13. And then when Carter gave away the canal, my dad retired from there and we moved to Pensacola.
So being from Pensacola, then, you was drafted by San Francisco. You would think that would be the furthest team from your mind, but did you have a favorite team growing up? And most people I talk to from Florida, for some reason, always say the Braves.
Well, yeah, because, back then, the only games you could see were WGN and WTBS, the Braves and Cubs. And obviously, I watched all of that, but I grew up being a huge Pete Rose, Big Red Machine fan. That was my team, and would have been great to be drafted by him. But you learn real quickly who you're drafted by is who your favorite team is then.
Yeah, exactly. I have a little Pete Rose story. I was down there on the field one day and just got off the field, and Pete Rose came up behind me, and we were talking there. And before he jumped in the elevator, he started rubbing my shoulders, and he said, "That'll be $50."
Yeah, Pete didn't do it for free.
No, not at all, and he still doesn't. But did you go through the minors pretty quickly? Did it seem like you went pretty quickly?
Not exactly. My career got off to a great start. Interesting story. Again, I'll bring it up, but went off to rookie ball, had a pretty good summer, made the all-star team. The next year I was in Fresno, California, which was high A, and we had an incredible talent laden team. I mean, we had Mackie Sasser, Charlie Hayes. We had a bunch of really good players. The first half of the season, we didn't do anything. And halfway through the season, after our draft, we got Jeff Brantley and Will Clark came straight to Fresno. And boy, I've got some funny, I ended up playing with Will and Jeff for with Will only 4.5 years because he only spent that summer in the minor leagues. But Jeff and I played another couple years, 2 or 3 years in the minor leagues together, and then 4 years in San Francisco. But that first year in Fresno, I had a big year. I was second baseman. I had 103 RBIs. The only guy that had more than me was Mark McGuire. I was quickly the second baseman of the future in all the magazines with the Giants, and went off to Double A and started having some struggles. I mean, I did okay, not terrible, but certainly not what I was accustomed to, and had some troubles, to be honest. It struggled a little bit in Double A. I got what we like to call home run itis. I went from being a really good hitter to learning how to pull the ball and pull the ball with power, driving in 103 RBIs, and quite frankly, it almost killed my career. Started trying to pull everything, almost like what you see these hitters doing today. But fortunately, I worked my way out of that and made it to the major leagues in 1989.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, it was popping in my mind. That's what they try to teach you today is drive the ball hard and the little ball hitting the opposite field, all that kind of stuff, going for hits. Seems like it's a thing of the past.
It is right now, Dave, but I'll tell you this, and I just learned this stat not 30 minutes before getting on here, that the major league, they talk about how averages, aren't important anymore, and that's just pure garbage. But the major league averages, and it started off like, I don't know, 20 years ago, teams that hit below 240 as a team. There were like zero for several years. And then after about 10 years, there became one or two. Last year, I think it said there were 12 teams that hit below 240, and which is terrible. But, the analytics say that you're supposed to do that. You score more runs, right? Swinging for the fence, not doing the little things. Well, I asked the guy that had this stat. It was actually on Facebook. And I said, well, I'd love to see a correlation with runs scored too. Compared to the first year of that till 2022, there were like 3,000 less runs scored in 2022 than there was like 20, 30 years ago. I can't remember what year it started. Mm-hmm. And that was with the National League using the DH, for the pitchers. And so there should have been a lot more runs, but even if there wasn't the DH, it still should have been more because this is the better way to play, right? And the better way to hit. And it's not. It's going to come back around. They're going to learn that this is a bunch of garbage. Striking out, nobody wants to watch a bunch of strikeouts. Sure, the long ball's great, but nobody wants to see a 3-2 game with 5 home runs and 8 hits in the game. It's boring. It's terrible. Yeah. And it needs to change.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% because, I see a lot of these guys that do hit home runs, and I won't mention any names, but it doesn't matter if you hit, 50, 60 home runs and you look at what they're doing. I mean, they're striking out over 100 times, 150 times. I mean, that's
200 times.
200 times. So it's like, it doesn't matter if you did hit 60 home runs. Look at your average. Look how many times you struck out. I mean, you would think that would be something that they would look at and say, we need to change this. But apparently right now they haven't.
Well, they haven't, but I think when these stats start showing how, I mean, look, they had to outlaw this shift. And I know we were going to talk about that at some point, but that's embarrassing. I mean, for Major League Baseball to have to outlaw a defense, if hitting that way is the best way to play and best way to score runs and improve your offense, then the opposing team shouldn't be able to put just a little defensive shift on you and shut you down. If they can and you can't beat it, that's embarrassing. Absolutely.
It is. So what would you have done if they would have moved the third baseman to short and the shortstop behind second base and done the shift?
That's actually a good example, even though I'm a right-handed hitter, because I typically, coming off the bench, trying to pull the ball, that's not a good recipe for success. So staying inside the ball and hitting it up the middle the other way was much better. But if there wasn't anybody on the left side of the infield, I'd have figured out how to pull the ball and beat it. That's just and let me I know you like Will Clark, and let me tell you a great story about Will Clark. I tell all these people this. And what's really funny and silly is people in the game and outside the game act like we didn't have analytics when we played. We did. We scouted the other team. Our pitchers charted the other hitters, but it wasn't to the degree what they're doing now because the hitters weren't so lopsided. But perfect example, I get called up May 1st, 1989. That next day, May 2nd, I'm starting at second base. Greg Maddux is on the mound. It's pretty cool playing against Ryan Sandberg, Andre Dawson, Maddux, and it's pretty cool. But the eighth inning comes around. We're down by 1 run. Will Clark is leading off the eighth inning, and it's not a shift like today, but for back then, it was a mini shift. Let's say the shortstop was real close to the right side of the infield. Third baseman was probably maybe 30 feet, off the line. Only down by 1 run. I think it was 3-2, something like that. Will Clark leading off. He's our number 3 hitter, almost won the batting title that year, hit probably somewhere around 30 home runs, which was very good back then.
Yeah.
And he pushes a bunt. And Will practice that all the time. He pushed the bunt down the third base line and jogged to first base, literally. And we have an old saying in baseball, don't forget about the hitter. Maddux was yelling at Will, swing the bat. Maddux was a cocky little son of a gun. He could back it up, but he could run his mouth, but he was yelling at Will to swing the bat. And like I said, we have the old saying, don't forget about the hitter. Well, the next hitter was Kevin Mitchell. He hit 49 home runs that year. Well, first pitch to Mitchell, he hangs a slider, and Mitchell hits it about from me in Florida to you in Kentucky. I mean, just hit a bomb. And we went on to win the game. But that's how you play. That's how you beat the shift. And we did this kind of stuff back then, but the hitters were willing, even Will. Now, with 2 outs in the 9th or something, they could put a shift on, and because that's not the time to bunt, if you're Will Clark. But it's just simple baseball, and that kind of stuff you don't see anymore. But that's winning baseball and how you win games.
Yeah, we always call that little ball. And then, back then, years ago, of course, when I played softball and baseball, they didn't do the shift. But even without the shift, you always try to hit the ball where they weren't. So, I mean, if they done the shift on you, there's nothing wrong with hitting the ball down at third base. If you're a left-hander hitting the opposite field. But anymore, you don't see them hitting the opposite field. They're just trying to drive it as hard as they can, exit velocity and everything else, and the angle, launch angle, and it's all about home runs, which I think is killing the game.
Oh, it absolutely is. I was so furious with the Giants. I guess it was 2 years ago when they had to play LA. I think in the first round, they both had 103 or 4 or 5 something wins during the season. Got to game 5. Obviously, it's 2-2 I think it was in San Francisco, but in the last inning, I think the Giants were down by 3. A hitter gets on base. A hitter comes up. A right-handed hitter comes up. They've got the shift on him with the first baseman holding the runner on. So there is no infielder on the right side. And we're down by 3 runs with 1 run on and 2 outs in the 9th. And he swings 3 times for the fence and pops up. And I'm just like, I mean, I don't know if he thought he was going to hit a 3-run homer, but what these players don't understand, and I mean this sincerely, is the other team right there, the Dodgers, would rather have that hitter hit a 2-run homer than to hit a single or double. Because a home run in that situation is a rally killer. And that's how you score runs, is a rally or a 3-run homer. You don't do it by hitting 3 solo home runs it happens every blue moon, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But all he had to do is just hit anything to the right side of the infield, and now we've got the tying run up and it was just infuriating to watch.
Yes, and uh, like we talk about here, baseball isn't like it used to be, but I'm hoping it'll get back to that level because they sure have taken the fun out of it. Uh, when we was talking about the minor leagues and stuff, you've got low A, high A, double A. Is there that big of a difference as a player uh, to each level when you're going from, say, single A to double A? The competition, can you tell that big a difference between each level?
The biggest difference, without a doubt, and most people talk about it and know it, but the biggest jump, without a doubt, in all of professional baseball is from A ball to double A. I don't know whether it's because most major league teams have two A ball teams, and so it just condenses at that point into just one double A team. But I can tell you, double A is the biggest physical jump in the game. Going to triple A is a different, what would you say, challenge in itself. Not so much with the physical game, because I think from double A to triple A, it's not a huge difference, but it's a huge difference mentally, because now you're one step below the big leagues, and you go from rookie ball, A ball, and double A, and it's mostly kind of like when you were playing college and high school and everything. It's you're a team, it's winning, it's you're together. And then you get to triple A, and it's just in so many cases it's just wow, just a shepherd's pie mix of you've got guys that are just got sent down from the minor league or major league, so they're bitter. You've got guys on the team that didn't get called up when the last thing happened, so they're bitter. You got guys that are there that are just career triple A's. They're not going up. They know they're not going up. And so you get there, and it's the whole team thing is gone. It's just, what can I do and how do I get to the major leagues? And I hated that. Because that's not the way I was brought up. That's not the way I ever played. It was always team first, and AAA. So AAA has that challenge. When you go from AAA to the major leagues, for me, I think the biggest jump is just all mental, and pressure wise, because in the major leagues, the lights are better. I mean, sure, the competition is obviously better, but the lights are better. The fields are perfect. The umpiring, which is not as good as it should be, but even the umpiring is better. Your flights are better. You can actually eat decent meals. You don't have to eat McDonald's every day. And so in a lot of ways, Major League Baseball is easier, but it's the pressure and what you do up here is a lot harder. So that's kind of the way I break down the levels.
That's pretty interesting, because I would have never thought from single A to double A would have been the hardest jump when it came to that. I just never really thought about that. And also, I know once you make it to the majors, it's not always that easy to stay in the majors.
No, it's not. And depending on what kind of position you're in. But I think if you asked around, most people in baseball that have played and or work in baseball would tell you that easily, if you can succeed in double A physically and you're a stud in double A, you can play in the big leagues. Whether you do or not is mostly up here and other circumstances. But physically, if you can seriously play in double A, you can play in the majors.
That's interesting. We have a couple people here. Myra Clark says hi, and Christine Elizabeth says hi, guys. So we've got people watching, and they'll be continually watching this after we're even done. So, what was it like? We talked about going to Major League, making the big show, the show. What was it like when you got that call that you were going to the majors?
Oh man, I tell you, Dave, I've been blessed. I do some motivational speaking. I travel all over the country and get to tell this story a lot. But I wish everybody could really feel what it was like, because getting that call, there's for something you've been uh, dreaming of since you were 8 years old and just working your whole life towards, to get that call, the the level of satisfaction and just pride and just joy that you feel is just incredible. I wish I could put it into real words, but you can't. It's just one of those things that, I think unless you've ever experienced it, you can't understand how awesome it is.
And I get excited just when I'm honorary captain of the Cincinnati Reds and get to bring the lineup card out to home plate. So I couldn't imagine, playing there every day and getting that call to the majors, how that would even feel.
Yeah, it's
You
it's not
pretty,
describable.
yeah, exactly. You debuted in 1989 for the Giants. That year, you guys went to the World Series and played the Oakland A's. Was it hard finding playing time for the Giants because there was so much talent there?
Well, that was a tough year, really. I got called up. Matt Williams had started off that season as the third baseman and just wasn't quite ready. Physically, he was, but I don't think mentally he was ready for it, and struggled for a while. Got sent down, but I got called up because Chris Spire got hurt, and I had never been a utility player in the minor leagues. I was an everyday player. And but I got called up because Chris got hurt. And to be honest, I've got a lot of really good stories about that. Chris is one of my favorite people in the world. He's just one of the best guys probably to ever play the game. But so I got called up in a utility role, and they had been trying Ernie Riles. I don't know if you remember old easy Ernie Riles, played with Milwaukee, the Giants, and the Red Sox, and left-handed hitting infielder, great guy. Well, he was doing a good job playing against right-handers at third base, and they had literally tried everybody else against lefties at third after they sent Matty down. And but even though I'd been through the minor leagues, been a big prospect, I had never been to big league spring training. So Roger Craig didn't know who I was. And finally, I remember I had to go up to his hotel room and just, said, listen, I said, I know you don't know who I am. And I said, but I'm telling you, give me a chance and I'll help you win games. And so he ended up giving me a shot at third base. And it's funny, we were talking earlier about Tom Browning. My first game at third base was against Tom Browning, and just being a left-hander. And I went 2 for 3, I think. And so after that, the rest of the first half, me and Ernie Riles played third base, and we were in first place. We were leading the division. Ernie was hitting over 300 against righties. I was hitting over 300 against lefties. But unfortunately for both of us, Matt Williams was in AAA and hit like 22 home runs and 200 at bats. I mean, just, insane numbers. And obviously, Matty was, almost Hall of Fame, credential player in the big leagues, just unbelievably talented. Well, so Ernie and I both had to go to the bench after the All-Star break, both hitting over 300 and us in first place, because they called up Matty. And then, but that was obviously the right long-term decision. But as a player, got hurt. But so going forward all the way through the World Series, I played against lefties. And I tell you, that's a bad job to have coming off the bench, because, 80% of the pitchers are right-handed. So, yeah, it got a little tough and stunk at times, but it was a great year to be a rookie in the major leagues with the Giants, though.
It was. And you actually, that year, of course, the Giants went to the World Series against Oakland, and you left your mark in the World Series because you went 3 for 6, hitting 2 home runs in Game 4. Game 4 of the World Series. That had to be exciting.
Well, it was 1 home run, 2-run homer.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it was, I tell everybody, you hear anybody out there that's, questioned or not sure what, athletes being in a zone is. I can tell you without a doubt it's real. I can promise you every pitch thrown to me in that World Series was in slow motion. If I could have duplicated whatever or however that happened, I would have been a Hall of Famer because honest to God, 3 for 6, I'm still mad to this day because I should have been 5 for 6 or 6 for 6. And how I made 3 outs with balls thrown at me in slow motion, I couldn't figure out how the rest of the team weren't killing these guys because it honestly was, the ball came like this at me. And, but it was fun. Tell you another interesting story. That was the Earthquake World Series. And first 2 games of the World Series were in Oakland. Well, they had Dave Stewart, Mike Moore, Bob Welch, and I can't remember who the fourth starter. The fourth starter was a lefty, but Dave Stewart and Mike Moore pitched in Oakland, pitched great. They beat the pants off of us. And with the DH, if you don't start in the American League, it stinks because you basically don't play. And then nationally, you had to be ready from the 3rd inning on, and sometimes even sooner. But we go back to San Francisco for game 3. And Bob Welch, I can't remember, Roger Craig walked by me about 30 minutes before the game and said, "Hey, you need to get out there and get loose. You might be starting." And he walked into the training room, and I was talking to a couple of my buddies from the minor leagues that were September call-ups, but not on the playoff roster. And their eyes got real big, and they're like, and I was like, "Oh, he's just messing with me." I honestly thought he was kidding because we got along pretty well. And he comes back out of the training room about 5 minutes later and says, "Listen, Bob Welch is sick, hurt, something." And he said, "La Russa has told us to plan on a lefty starting. Welch is going to go out and warm up, but he's not going." And he goes, "So if a lefty starts, you're starting second or third. I can't remember where. I think second." And so it's like, oh man, he's serious. And so I tell everybody, like when I travel and speak, I say at that point I do or did what all good ball players do is I went to the bathroom. And I was actually coming out of the bathroom, going to head to my locker, grab all my stuff and get out there and get loose when the earthquake hit. And only way I can describe it to you, Dave, is I thought I was dead. I stupidly, and anybody listening or watching this down the road, if you're ever in a room with me and I yell earthquake and take off running, you might want to follow me because the safest place to be in an earthquake is outside the building.
Yeah,
and
it is.
I was 30, 40 yards from being outside in the parking lot, and stupidly, because you don't know how big that earthquake's going to get until it stops. It ended up getting so bad that I could hardly stand up. The lights went out. It's pitch dark. And an earthquake, if you've ever been to a college football game where the fans do their feet, and that rumble, that's what an earthquake sounds like. And then if you can imagine what concrete above your head being twisted and torqued and bent sounds like, I thought, wow, I'm dead right here. And they're going to find me 30 yards from outside. And anyways, that ended up, it calmed down. For some reason, the lights came back on temporarily. It wasn't generators because we didn't have lights for 5, 6, 7 days after that. But so we go out, we're going to get loose and thinking we're going to play the game. This is pre-cell phones. We didn't know what's going on. And so, so people kid me and, about being lucky on the golf course or something. I'm like, yeah, tell me how lucky I am. I was about to start a World Series game and got earthquaked out.
Yeah.
How about
that is true. And they called that series, of course, the Bay Bridge series because of the Bay Bridge between San Francisco and Oakland. But when that happened on Game 3, what went through your mind? I mean, I know you thought, just take off running, but did the players, like, anybody run to the center of the field, or did everybody just try to get out of the stadium?
Oh yeah, no, I'll tell you what happened with most of them. And the funniest thing too is Dusty Baker was my hitting instructor in San Francisco for 4 years. I love Dusty. Uh, cool Bake is what we call him. He's cool. He's the man everywhere he goes. Awesome guy, most knowledgeable baseball man or person I've ever been around. Awesome guy. Well, as I'm standing in that door jam, now realizing I might live as it starts calming down, it's so funny. First guy I see come out of the lunchroom is Dusty. And I'm like, holy cow, Dusty, that scared the what out of me. And Dusty goes, didn't scare me. And I'm like, oh, shut up. I'm like, don't, come on, Bake, don't give me that. I said, that scared the mess out of you. Didn't scare me. And I'm like, oh, so I just went off, got my gloves, and went outside. And yeah, you want to know why it didn't scare him? Because he ran out of the cafeteria into the parking lot. So he was outside when it got really bad. I didn't scare me. It scared you enough to run out of the stadium. And what most of the guys did, because I think I was only one in the locker room when it hit. There was probably a bunch of people in the cafeteria in the lunchroom, which was on the way to going outside. And I assume most of them ran outside. I never talked to anybody else about it. Most of the guys in the dugout, they all, and both teams ran out onto the field. But yeah, so, but a very interesting thing about that, after the World Series was over, I was one of the few Giants that had a good series because we, got the mess beat out of us. But so I was doing a bunch of interviews after, and it was amazing to me that a lot of the TV and camera and sports radio and they hadn't thought of what we all had, and because they were asking me, how disappointing it is to lose a World Series. And I told them, I said, to be honest, I don't think I really know, because people didn't think about it. But if you go back and look it up online or watch the old 30 for 30 special about the World Series, Earthquake World Series, you'll see that I think there was less than 20 people died in that earthquake. They thought there were going to be thousands of people on those underneath those freeways that collapsed, because it hit at what, 5:07, something like that.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Rush hour. Those freeways are packed every day of the week at that time. But because Oakland was playing San Francisco, there were 60,000 people roughly at the stadium. But everybody else apparently in town had already left work and gotten to wherever they were going to watch the World Series, because those freeways and the bridge that collapsed, they were all empty. And so, we had talked about it, us playing Oakland saved probably thousands of lives. And so when we all kind of remembered, this was during we had almost 2 weeks off in between games 2 and games 3. We had thought about that. So while losing the World Series did stink, it hurts. But knowing that, if we hadn't gotten there, there'd be a lot more dead people out of San Francisco right now from that earthquake, really made it obviously worthwhile. But, we'd love to change or trade places with Oakland and be the winners in that event. But yeah, that's a lot of I'm telling you, there's so much stuff happened my rookie year. It was amazing.
Yeah, I remember watching that series. I remember watching, I think, Tim McCarver getting ready to go. He was already live, but the games were getting ready to start, and all of a sudden everything just started shaking and went black. So, yeah, I remember watching that when that happened.
Yeah, I think it was Jim Palmer and is it Al McGuire?
Could be.
Yeah, I think that's who it was, but I'm not, you get older, you
Yeah.
can't remember, but it was, yeah, a lot of fun to play in it. Great season. And, people ask me all the time when I travel and speak, you know, what's your greatest memory from Major League Baseball? And most people that know anything about my career assume it's, hitting a home run in the World Series, which was incredible. But most people, have forgotten. And I can tell you, Dave, that's not even close to my most memorable, moment, in my career. It was watching Dave Dravecki come back from cancer earlier that year. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Um, it was, yeah, the most incredible thing. And then 5 days later, one of the worst things, when his arm broke, similar to how our buddy Tom Browning's arm snapped.
Yeah.
But yeah, watching Dave come back from cancer that year is the most incredible thing I've ever seen.
And I was going to ask you that question later on, but you answered it for me. But I was thinking maybe the earthquake was the most memorable moment of your playing career, but that makes sense.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, the earthquake was huge, but it's not something if somebody asked me, watching Dave come back from cancer 9 months after being told he would never, he might be able to brush his teeth or comb his hair left-handed, but he would never pitch again. And 9 months later, he's on the mound in Candlestick Park, pitches 8 innings against your Reds and gets the win.
Yeah.
Shoot, I still get goosebumps right now just talking about it.
Yeah, that is amazing. And we talked about Will Clark, which Will was one of my, of course, favorite San Francisco Giants back in the day. Uh, what was it like? What was Will like as a teammate?
Will's one of my favorite people, but he's when you see stuff that some people didn't like him or whatever, you can certainly understand that if you know Will. He's a Cajun coon, ASS, and just he's one of these guys that's just brutally honest. Uh, there's no filter from his head to his tongue, and he just says what's on his mind. And anybody that does that is going to say a lot of dumb stuff. And so a lot of the ill feelings are warranted in a sense. But I can tell you this, he's one of my favorite teammates. And I can tell you this, there's not a person that ever played against Will or with Will that didn't know when he stepped on that field, there was only one goal, and that was to win the game. He was the most unselfish superstar player I ever played with. And I guarantee you, he may be the most unselfish superstar player to ever play the game. He was all about winning first and Will second, uh, better so than any superstar player I ever saw.
That's
And
what I like.
and
Go
an
ahead.
unbelievable clutch hitter. I always say, if I had to, if I needed a base hit to save my life, if I couldn't be up there to do it, there's only one guy I'd pick, and that'd be Will Clark. He had a way of, man, he never threw away an at bat. He had, like, I was very good. I prided myself on being a clutch hitter. I think I led almost every team I played on in clutch hitting, which was seventh inning on within a run or two and runners on base and stuff like that. I really got up for those moments. But a lot of the other at bats, I didn't have that same focus. Will had the ability, whether we were down by 9 runs, up by 9 runs, or we were down by one with a runner on second and 2 outs in the ninth, he had the same intensity and never gave away an at bat. And that always impressed me. And just, man, he was a teammate, but I'm telling you, he'd run through a brick wall to win the game. And that's what I always respected and loved.
And that's why I liked watching Will Clark, because just watching him play, you could see that passion for the game.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But it was, yeah, but it was passion for winning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I loved about Will, because that's the way I played. And but he was he was easily the most unselfish, great player I ever played with.
Do you ever have a chance anymore to like talk or see any of your former teammates? Do you ever stay in touch with them anymore?
Well, interesting, the Giants have been so good to us. There for a long while, for 20, maybe 2 years, we were the last team to, make the World Series, even though we didn't win it. And in 2009, they flew us all out to San Francisco for a 20-year reunion of the World Series. And that was awesome. Got to see most of the guys. Some of the guys were still coaching and weren't there. And then in 2019, well, after 2009, then the Giants won what, 2002, 4, and 6, the World Series. And I remember thinking, well, at least we got one reunion out of our World Series, because now, they've got 3 championships. What do they care about, us anymore? And shoot, back in 2019, they flew us all out, and we absolutely had a blast. And Will and Chris Spire and some of the guys that were involved in the game earlier that couldn't make it were there. And man, we just had a blast. And then 19 was great. I got to take my daughters. They were 20 and 21. So they got to sit around and watch all of us cutting up and just having a great time telling stories um, and funny stories about Chris Spire. He's one of my favorites, and um, he actually took me under his wing when I got called up to. He had a hurt back, and I had no idea how to do his job. He taught me how to do his job, and I ended up doing it so well that year. I ended up taking his job that year. That was his last season. He didn't play again until September when the rosters expanded. But man, I could go on for 20 minutes about Chris. But we're at the reunion in 2019, and I called Chris over. I said, "Chris, come here. I want you to meet my daughters." And so he comes over, and he's just the nicest guy in the world. And he's telling them that, "Oh yeah, your dad, he took my job, and this and this and that." And they're all like, you know, "Oh." And I looked at him. I said, "Listen, just wait a minute. Don't feel sorry for him." I said, "That son of a gun was in his 21st year in the major leagues. It was time for him to go home." All right. And I said, "So don't feel sorry for him." I said, "You got 21 years." And we laughed and had a big time about that. But yeah, but he taught me how to do his job, and it's partly the reason I did so well at it.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't ask any more than that from somebody. So, um, thinking about, I've talked to, quite a few players on these interviews, but one thing I have noticed that never really thought about is a lot of these players that I've interviewed, once they quit playing the game, they really don't stay in touch with their teammates. It's almost like when you graduate from high school, you don't see anybody anymore. And that's almost like baseball, what I've, found out so far.
No, that's absolutely true, Dave, and it's really a shame that we do that, because when we get together, like I said, I hope and pray I hope they do one, start doing one every 5 years, because we're getting older, and it was pretty hard, and just to in 2019 to even know that was our 30-year reunion of the Earthquake World Series. And I mean, that hurt to some degree, because I mean, it felt like 10 years ago, you know,
Yeah.
and it's been 30 years. But yeah, that's, um, we ought to take it on ourselves to get together anyways, even if the team doesn't pay for it and fly us out. Um, but it was pretty fun, because some of the old brass that are still with the team, I was wondering, I don't think anybody asked them, but obviously they were thinking the same thing, because we had this one night and had an open mic, people get up and talk, and Bob Lurie, our old owner, got up and talked about how, you know, and the whole theme of the owner and the management back then, they said, the, you guys didn't win it all, and even said, you're probably wondering why we had you guys out again and all. And they just said, because you guys were our favorite team. And when we got together, I'd love to be around other teams, because look, every team has friendships and fun and stuff, but man, we were a family that year, and just, man, getting together, we really should try and do it more often, because we are getting older. But it was so much fun seeing everybody, and it was like we hadn't missed a day.
I know I talked to one of the players one day, and I was asking him about his teammate, and they played together. I think it was 81 or 82. They played on the same team together, and I said, when was the last time you talked to him? And he said, I guess it would have been 81 or 82. And I'm thinking, that's 40 years you two haven't talked. So it just
I
blows my
know.
mind. Goes, I've never thought of that.
Yeah, it's terrible that we do that, but it's probably some, because if you play for any length of time, I mean, you've played with hundreds of different guys, and you just lose track. And I'll be honest with you, Facebook has been great. We've got a Facebook page. I don't know who came up with it or how they did it, but there's about 14,000 ex-professional baseball players anywhere. If you played rookie ball up to the major leagues, you can be in this group. And there's about 14,000 of us. And I've
Wow.
reconnected with a bunch of old friends. And just as an example, a old teammate of mine, Lee Tinsley, with the Mariners. He was a coach with the Reds. I don't know if you knew Lee Tinsley, but he just died, passed away a few weeks ago. And but I would have never known that if I wasn't in this group. And but it has been really good for doing just what you said. Now, we don't talk a lot necessarily on the phone, but we'll message each other and see each other on here and bust on each other and have a little fun. It's a good little setup.
Yeah. You talking about players that passed away. I done an interview 2 years ago with Albie Pearson, which you probably don't remember. Albie, he was the 1958 Rookie of the Year, and he passed away yesterday.
Uh,
So
that state, yeah.
I know it. Being a Cincinnati fan, always watched the Reds my whole life and everything. The Cowboy, Jeff Brantley, I've always liked Jeff, talk to him every chance I get. When I'm down to the Reds Fest or some of the games I go to, I run into Jeff and talk to him. Now, you played with Jeff out in San Francisco. Jeff's very down to earth. Was he always like that?
Yeah, off the field.
Yeah.
On the field, he's one of the most intense guys you'll ever play with. He was much different on the field than he was off. And Jeff was my roommate in San Francisco our first couple of years, because the rookies and first year guys or so, and may have even been my third year too. Don't know. But we were roommates, and yeah, JB and I are real close. Great guy, love him to death. But he was much different on the field than he was off the field. Now, you take somebody like Will Clark. Will Clark on the field and off the field, he's intense. He's running that mouth and going at it. But Jeff he was laid back off the field, but on it, he was a fighter.
Yeah, I love talking to him every time I see him down there. He knows me and he'll come up and talk to me. But the next time I see him and talk to him, I'll tell him that you said hi.
And then look for Tommy Thrall, the y'all's one of the radio guys. Tommy, he was here with the Pensacola Blue Wahoos. We have a double A team here, and I was doing the TV, the color, for the TV games for 4 or 5 years. And Tommy and I became friends, and I know he's up there in Cincinnati. Great guy. Tell him I said hi as well.
I will. Just saw him a couple weeks ago in the Reds Caravan.
Yep.
So, we talked about the Reds and everything. On October 4th, 1992, you played the Cincinnati Reds. and you did something pretty dramatic in the 13th inning. You want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, that was pretty funny. It looked, after the game on ESPN, they were not making fun of me, but having a little fun with what I said. But, we're playing in Cincinnati. It's the last game of the season. Neither one of us are going to make the World Series or the playoffs, and certainly not the World Series. But it's basically just the last game of the season. And to be honest with you, nobody wants to go extra innings. And but we did that night, and we went 13 innings. And in the 13th inning, we got the bases loaded. Don't remember who I pinch hit for. Could have been Jose Uribe, or might have even been a pitcher. But I pinch hit, and I go up to the plate, and I think was it Ruskin.
I think so.
A lefty with Cincinnati, and I worked the count. I got down in the count 0-2. I worked the count back to full count, and he threw me a curveball, full count with the bases loaded, tie game in the 13th inning, and I hit a home run to left field, grand slam to win the game. But the other big thing about that game, though, a lot of people have forgotten. During the season, they had reached an agreement, the San Francisco Giants did, Bob Lurie, to move the team to Tampa Bay. And this was supposed to be, and it was billed as, the last game for the San Francisco Giants. And that's what we all thought. That's what, the media thought, everybody thought. So hitting a grand slam to win the last game for the San Francisco Giants was pretty big. And after the game, I was being interviewed by ESPN about it. And they asked me, and I said, to be honest, and I don't think it was a done deal, but obviously it wasn't because they didn't move, but it was expected, let's just say. And after the game, they asked me about it. And I said, if the Giants if it does go through and they move to Tampa Bay, I said, it's going to be pretty historic and a great thing to remember that, hitting a grand slam to win the last game of, for the San Francisco Giants. I mean, it's a storied franchise. And so, and I said, but if they don't move, I hit a grand slam to win the last game of the season. Big deal. And which is true. And I mean, for me personally, it was still nice, but we were both going home. We weren't making the playoffs, and on ESPN that night, they had some fun with me, about laughing that, I guess a grand slam to win the game isn't that big a deal, but that wasn't exactly what I meant. But if the team didn't move, nobody's going to remember this home run except for me, really.
Yeah. Yep. And then 93, after that season, you started playing for the Seattle Mariners. What was it like playing with teammates like Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson? I mean, that had to be pretty cool also.
Yeah. Edgar Martinez. That was a lot of fun. I tell you, the most fun about that, or what I enjoyed the most, was playing for Lou Piniella, though. I know he managed in Cincinnati. Lou was an emotional guy. He was really hard on young players, not intentionally, he didn't treat them necessarily any different, other than, he may have jumped on them a little easier than he would an Alex or Ken Griffey or Randy Johnson. But Lou would get on anybody if it was deserved. Just like back in Cincinnati when him and Rob Dibble went at it. If Lou thought you needed to hear something, he'd let you know. But what I loved about Lou is you always knew where you stood. A lot of coaches, managers in the professional leagues and minor leagues and major leagues, they'll walk by you, pat you on the back, tell you how good you're doing, and then next day you're gone. And with Lou, you knew where you stood. If he expected you to do something and you didn't, he let you know. So you always knew his expectations were. And I loved that. But he would jump anybody. He'd lose his mind in the first inning just as easy as he would in the ninth inning. And he's the one that turned that franchise around, his attitude, in my opinion, because they were just used to losing, and he wasn't going to settle for it. And but yeah, playing and watching Randy Johnson and Junior was, man, those guys were good. And Edgar is one of the best hitters I ever played with, just all around hitters. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. But I loved Lou. I hit lefties very well. And pretty much all season, if a lefty was pitching, I played somewhere. It didn't. Maybe first, Tino Martinez got hurt his knee that year. I platooned at first for a while. Our left fielder was out for a while. I platooned in left against lefties, and I loved it because I got really good at hit. I didn't like hitting lefties when I was young, because they're always, I like the hard throwing right-handers. But when you sit on the bench more, the old bat speed tends to slow down, and seeing those lefties throwing a little easier was right up my alley, and did a good job at it. But I love Lou because he was awesome to me.
You talk about Sweet Lou, as we called him here in Cincinnati. I remember him picking up a base and throwing it in the outfield and throwing a fit on. That's how Lou was. And you talk about different managers. We had Sparky Anderson here, and he kind of treated them a little different too. I know some of the players I talked to. You had the Great Eight, the Big Reds machine, and to everybody else, Sparky Anderson called them his turds. So you had the Great Eight, and the rest of them nothing to do with. So yeah, I mean, Lou was fun to watch. The 1990 World Series team was fun to watch. So yeah, Lou was a great coach. So he was fun. You hold a record for positions played during your career. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting. How many positions did you play?
Well, I have to correct this, Dave, because everybody says it, and I never played center field in the major leagues. And
Really?
I don't know. I did in a professional game, but not an official major league game. And everybody reports it. I played every position, DH, pitched, caught, everything. And the thing I'll say one thing, because I don't like talking about me, and because I wasn't a great player. The one thing looking back on my career that I regret, and I regret not because there's anything I could have done about it, but it's just that I never got a chance to play second base every day. That was my best position. I didn't really have enough power to be a third baseman. Defensively, I could play the position. Quite frankly, it's easy compared to second, but I didn't have the power to be an everyday third baseman. And, looking back, I wish I'd have gotten a chance to play second base every day. But I got called up when Chris Spire got hurt because I could play pretty much everywhere. But one of the best compliments I ever had was, you remember Rick Leach?
Yep.
Rick Leach played for who was he with? Detroit, I think it was. He was Old Michigan quarterback, and then he played. Now I just went brain dead. I can't remember where Rick spent a lot of his time in the major leagues, but either way, he ended up in San Francisco with me. And then years later, he lived in Flint, Michigan, where a good friend of mine from junior college, one of my teammates, lived. And he called me one day and said he ran into Rick Leach on the golf course and got to talking with him and brought up my name. And he said, Rick told him, he said, Greg's the only player I ever played with that could legitimately start at every position on the field, not just fill in. And that really meant a lot to me. I wasn't the biggest, like I said, fastest, strongest. Center field would have been my worst position just because I wasn't fleet of foot. but yeah, but somewhere along the lines, it's got put in there that I played every position. I did
Yeah.
play it in the Hall of Fame game. We were playing in Cooperstown against the Minnesota Twins. I played all 9 positions in that game. But yeah, I defensively could play pretty much everywhere and even catch, not as an emergency. The Giants tried to talk me into becoming a catcher, but I wasn't sure. That's a tough position. I had never done it. And at that point, I was young and thought I would get a chance to play second base, which never happened. Looking back, I'd probably do it differently, knowing what I know now. But yeah, so I played everywhere except for center field.
I know Ed Ott was telling me the other day that he came up as a third baseman. They wanted him to be an outfielder. It took him 5 years to learn how to be an outfielder. And then after learning the outfield position, they turned him into a catcher, which took him a couple more years.
Yeah, and just like I said, I would I would do it that way as well, become a catcher, because they wanted to give me the starting job in San Francisco as a catcher. And, but, that sounds good. They're going to send you down to the minor leagues for a couple of weeks and then call you up as a starting catcher. But you go down to AAA and you've never caught before and hit a whole game, much less for 2 weeks with dead legs, because after catching 5 or 6 innings, your legs are like jelly. And the guys like Johnny Bench, and I played with Gary Carter, man, those guys that could hit and do that were just unbelievable. And, but if I go down to AAA and I hit $150 for 2 weeks, I'm not coming back up as the everyday catcher until I show I can hit and catch. And I didn't know I could do that. It's different. It really is. And, but again, looking back on my career, knowing I wouldn't get a chance to start, that I would do that. But anyways, that's my only regret, really.
I know Johnny Bench. I saw him a couple years ago down in Cincinnati. They had a old timers game or something on the field there. But Johnny Bench, his legs are humongous. His calf muscles and thighs, it's unbelievable. Still today.
Yeah, Johnny Bench was one of my favorites. Man, that whole team was awesome. I love Pete Rose, and it's like I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were trying to argue that LeBron James is now the greatest player because he has the most points, and I don't even think it's close with him and Jordan. And I said, well, would anybody ever consider Pete Rose the greatest hitter in the game because he has the most hits? And I said, of course not. Is it an unbelievable record that I don't think will ever get broken, because nobody will average 200 hits a year for 22 years? Again, I don't think that's going to ever happen again. But Johnny Bench was just, man, he was a man's man. He was an animal. He was, people wanted to compare him to Pudge Rodriguez. And I'm like, Johnny Bench could catch and throw like Pudge, but could hit like, the best power hitter in the league. He was certainly something.
Talk about hitting. I mean, you thinking about yourself back when you played and stuff, you also have an interesting part that I was looking at here. You actually hit over 400. You went 20 for 48 against all-star pitchers like Norm Charlton, Greg Maddux, Frank Viola, and Danny Jackson. What was your secret when it came to hitting over 400 against those pitchers?
Well, I think that's just part, I don't know, kind of something you get up for. I did very well against a lot of the really good pitchers. But I think it's because those type of situations, I got up more mentally and was able to, I don't know, just brought out the best of me, like at the end of the game or the last few innings or whatever. But I can't explain why. But I think it's just because I got fired up for those matchups, and maybe just concentrated a little more. And that's maybe why I wasn't a Hall of Famer or All-Star myself.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting, though, that you done so well. I will tell you that I talked to Norm Charlton earlier, and I mentioned to him about, that statistic, and he said he remembers you hitting really well off of him, uh, and that he said you were a really patient hitter, and I thought that was interesting. And he said that most likely you got ahead of the count on him, and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like Norm remembers you being a good hitter against him too.
Well, Norm's a friend of mine. That year in Seattle, I got to play with Norm, and he's one of those gamers too. That man, he was my kind of player. Man, when he was on that field, he was going to give it everything you got. But I can tell you, you didn't want to get behind the count on Norm. That dude was filthy. I mean, he threw 97, 98 miles an hour with a split finger that would go halfway to home plate, waist high, and just drop to your ankle. And he was filthy. But yeah, so hitting him pretty well is something. And I do tease him sometimes online because he's in that Facebook group. But yeah, so that's nice of him to say. And but he was my kind of player and one of my favorite teammates.
We talked earlier about the changes in baseball. What do you think about all these changes you've got now? They're trying to do. You got time limit on the pitcher. If he takes more than 15 seconds, it's going to be an automatic ball. If the hitter steps out more than once, it's going to be a strike. They got rid of the shift. No fake throws to third. I know we talked about it earlier, but what do you think about all that?
Now they got bigger bases too, for crying out loud. It is, yeah. Honest to goodness, it's to most of us ex-players, it's embarrassing. And what takes a lot of the time is they don't do, like you said, the small things, all the strikeouts, the pitchers. My goodness, in the playoffs and stuff, sometimes they won't throw a pitch without the catcher was running out there between every pitch. The whole thing with Houston and stealing signs, that's embarrassing. While it's illegal, and I agree with punishing them, the fact that how are these teams letting them do that? I mean, we all tried to steal signs, but we didn't do it with cameras and anything electronics or anything like that. But if we could figure out a tip on the pitcher, and we did for several pitchers. Jay Howell in Los Angeles, we knew every pitch he was going to throw. We knew David Cone. If you go back and look, the Giants against David Cone in New York, that dude was filthy. And we did him. We did better against him than probably any other team in the league. But we had a tip. I mean, not from somebody else, that we figured out. He tipped some of his pitches. And we did all that. But the fact that they didn't change that pitchers and catchers can't call their signs with simple, or call their pitches with simple signs and mix it up enough to keep the other team from stealing them, that's embarrassing. But I think the other thing too, what would help is, they go through 8 pitchers a game now because they're carrying like 13 pitchers. Move that down a little bit and keep them from, doing that would speed the game up. Making contact, hitting the ball, that kind of stuff actually speeds the game up. Pitchers throwing strikes, getting like Maddox. Somebody said Maddox couldn't compete in today's game. Greg Maddox, that dude would win 20 games every season in today's game. That dude was a machine. He knew how to pitch and get you out. I saw something the other day that he had a 70-something pitch complete game. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so I don't like any of it. I think it's silly. I do think that they needed to do some things to speed up the game, but the stuff they're doing is not the right solution in my opinion. Just my advice, and I think it's terrible.
I think about Tom Browning. I mean, when he pitched a game, it seemed
No,
like it was over within 2 hours.
if it was over 2 hours and 20 minutes a game he started, the other pitcher was a turtle. No question about it, because you get that guy against Greg Maddux, you almost couldn't play you couldn't make it 2 hours,
Yeah.
because they worked fast. They knew what they were doing. They knew what pitches they wanted to throw. They didn't need the pitcher or a catcher to come out and talk to them in between every batter, and just so much junk. And but the game is changing. I think, like we were talking with strikeouts, and look, they're not scoring more runs now. They're not. You can say the pitchers are better. Well, you've got to adjust. If pitchers are throwing harder and they're nastier stuff, you have to shorten your swing to put the ball in play and beat them another way than trying to hit home runs. And I think it'll come back around. Uh, you know, Analytics are great. Like I said, we used them. But what they're suggesting that the analytics show is just wrong. Swinging for the fence and home runs every pitch, every count, it is silly. And one thing, I didn't see it so much last year, but if you look at the best teams, Houston, Tampa Bay, even the Giants a couple of years ago when they won 105, they're good hitters. They hit the ball the other way. Houston doesn't just swing for the fence and strike out and lead the league. They're good. The Dodgers hit all those home runs all season, but then what happens to them in the playoffs? They get shut down. And in the playoffs, it goes back to a little more small ball. Not completely, but you got to do the little things to win it all.
I also read where there was going to put a watch in the minor leagues on a pitcher, and the pitcher was going to start calling the signs instead of the catcher, and they were going to communicate through his watch.
Oh my God. I don't even want to hear it. It's so silly now, Dave. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even watch until playoffs, and then I'll start watching, but I'll only watch certain teams. Like look what happened to the Yankees last year. Look how many home runs they hit. What happened to them in the playoffs? Got bounced real quick. The Dodgers get bounced, which I do enjoy because I hate the Dodgers being a Giant, and that's a sincere emotion. We did not like the Dodgers, like each other, but the good teams, good all around teams, are the ones that usually win it all.
Yeah. Yep, that is true. And we talk about pitchers and stuff and different things here. I know you hit well against Maddox and those guys, but was there a pitcher that you did not like to face?
Oh God, yeah. I can tell you there were two pitchers that I did not want to face, and that was the first one, Ramon Martinez, Pedro's brother. Man, I'm telling you, that guy, he threw 94, 95 miles an hour, effortless. But the ball would run sometimes in, sometimes away. His breaking pitches weren't very good, quite frankly. His changeup and curveball, to me, I thought they looked like balloons. But he would never throw one close enough that I could even swing at, much less hit. And then I'd get ahead in the count. I couldn't see his fastball till it was halfway home. Couldn't pick it up. I'd rather face anybody. I'd rather face Sandy Koufax, Drysdale, any of them, if I needed a hit to save my life again, because I know I can't hit Ramon. I may not hit them either, but at least I'd go up the bat thinking I got a chance. The other one that was just like that was Al Leiter. Remember Al? Good pitcher, but for some reason couldn't see the ball on him till it was halfway home. And There were several others, but those are the ones that really just stand out. And then there were others that you just saw the ball well against. Doesn't matter how good they are. If you saw it well, you could hit it.
And always ask the players too, about funny things that's happened to them or pranks or anything. Is there any funny clubhouse stories that you can share with us that maybe happened to you or somebody else?
Well, I'll tell you a couple. One's simple. My rookie year, look, I was young, dumb, and naive. I got called up. I didn't even know I got called up to replace Chris Spire. I didn't read the reports every day. I wasn't one of those type players. I like to just look, I'm going to play as hard as I can. I'm going to do everything I can regardless. And I just didn't like to focus on that kind of stuff. But I actually got called up for Chris. Didn't even know that. I didn't know he was on the 10-day disabled list. Now, everybody else on the team and in the front office probably knew I was just there for 10 days. I didn't, though. So when I came up, I brought all my stuff. I brought my golf. I love golf. That's my thing. And that's my favorite hobby. Always loved golf since I was little. And I brought my golf clubs, my shoes, everything, right? Because I didn't know why. I planned on being in major leagues for 15 years. I need my clubs, you know? And so I get picked up at the airport by a front office guy and didn't know what was going on. I knew we had a 7:05 game. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he drives me to the ballpark and drops me off. And I'm like, holy cow, these big leaguers get here early. And which I wasn't complaining, mind you. I was, they could have flown me in and I'd have slept in my locker the night before. But now I've got all my clubs. I told the clubhouse guy to put my clubs somewhere. Well, Mike Murphy, the clubhouse guy, has been there. He's still there. He's a legend, been there for 60 years. He had some fun with me and showed some of the veterans my golf clubs and everything. So I come in after batting practice and my golf shoes, my White FootJoy golf shoes, are in my locker, signed by the entire team. And right across the tongue was Roger Craig, our manager. And I was like, really? I said, come on, man. Don't show them they think I'm coming here to play golf. And my daughter opened my door. I told her to close it. But yeah, so that was pretty funny. I still have those shoes somewhere. And then
I was going to ask you if you still had them.
Oh yeah, I have them somewhere. And I'll tell you one other story. I was in New York. We were playing the Mets my rookie year. And in the 9th inning of a game, I got put in to pinch hit against Randy Myers, their closer, and hit a line drive single up the middle, really hit a bullet. And after the game, I couldn't wait to see, my first hit ball, and in my locker. And I still have that one somewhere too, but it has on there, Greg Litton, and they have Litton spelled Litten, not O-N. First major league hit off a puss baller, Randy Myers or something, and I'm like, man, you guys ruined my ball. I was like about to cry. And they brought out the real one, and that was just a joke. But yeah, so we had a lot of fun. Can't tell a lot of the clubhouse stories, but it was fun. Those are two of the fun ones I remember.
You talk about your last name. There's actually a lot of Littons that live in this area, and there used to be a Litton Ford here in the next county over, spelled your same way.
Really?
Yeah. So now, of course, you're not playing baseball and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I know you said you do motivational speaking and different things. What else do you do with your time these days?
I've done several things. I was when I first got out of ball, I went into the jewelry business. I became a certified diamond grader and appraiser with Gemological Institute of America. I was partners in a jewelry store for about 8 or 10 years, and got a little bored with that and went into a company called the Studer Group. It's a big healthcare consulting business. The owner is the guy that owns the Pensacola Blue Wahoos. Uh, Loves baseball, obviously, big baseball nut. He brought me into their organization as a motivational speaker. He loves baseball. And so I've been doing that off and on for 20 years, which I absolutely love. Other than playing baseball, it's probably the only other thing that I think God really blessed me with a talent for, running my mouth. But I love doing that. I got into sales so I could create my own schedule, so I could speak when I needed to or wanted to. I got out of that a few years back, got into the mortgage business, but so I do some dabbling in some of the old stuff I do, and I've done several things, but speaking is definitely, man, I just love sharing. I love speaking to any groups. It's just rewarding. Um, I don't like motivational. I like inspirational, maybe a better word to describe what I do.
Yeah.
But look, my whole career, I was a little ant that, wasn't supposed to make it. In high school, my freshman year, I got cut from the junior varsity baseball team, started every varsity game my 10th grade year, went on in high school to be pretty good. Wasn't great. Had a couple of junior college scholarships, but I just kept working. My senior year, I put on 10 pounds lifting. My freshman year, I put on 10 pounds. They started talking about me my freshman year that I might get drafted. Didn't happen. But then my sophomore year, now I was 10 pounds heavier. I say that, and I was only 185 pounds. It wasn't like I was 210. But then I got drafted, and then, up and down minor leagues. And so, I took a lot of pride in, somebody told me I couldn't do something, I was going to do it. And, if I wasn't supposed to hit guys like Greg Maddux and Norm Charlton and those guys, even Rob Dibble, I hit pretty good. I had my first major league double off of him. I wasn't a fastball dummy. He threw me a 2-strike slider, which wasn't the smartest. But so, I love sharing. I love just the never give up, never give in attitude. And, if you believe you can do it, you can.
Yeah, you got to keep trying and trying until you at least accomplish it, or try to accomplish it. I know you got in a little bit of politics too. I read up where you ran on the right side, but of course you got defeated there a few times or whatever.
Yeah.
But I know you dabbled a little bit in that too. So,
Well, I would love to get involved in politics. I think I'm done with that now. I've ran a couple of times and didn't work out. And funny thing about it, I remember one of the years I ran, and after it was over that night, guys were like, "Wow, man, what are you going to do tomorrow?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? I'm going to go to work." And they're like, I guess they thought I was going to have a pity party for a few days, a week or something. But I'm like, look, that's life. You get knocked down.
yeah.
It's like that old saying I share it every time I speak. I didn't come up with it, but it's one of my favorites. Getting knocked down doesn't make you a failure. It's when you quit getting back up that does. And I don't care what happens in life. Just keep getting up and keep moving forward, and you'll be okay.
You're exactly right. So we're at the end of this interview, and we've got some rapid fire questions right here, and we'll see how good you are at answering a few of these. If you don't care, there, Greg. So,
Oh, yeah,
um,
that's good.
who was your favorite teammate? And I'm pretty sure you're going to say Spires.
Yeah, well, Chris was one of my buddies, but my favorite teammate was actually Jeff Brantley. He was my roommate
Okay.
and my buddy. Yeah.
The Cowboy.
Yep.
So, favorite ballpark?
Oh man, it's one of those things. It's tough. I'd have to say Fenway Park, but I like the old school stadiums, Fenway, Wrigley. Surprisingly, worst weather ever, Candlestick, but I got to love it playing there. And But yeah, I'd have to say Fenway. The old school ballparks were my favorites.
And I figure you'd say Great American since you had a home run there, but that was before Great American. I think that would have been
Yeah,
Riverfront Stadium.
yeah, it was Riverfront back in the day.
Yep, first car.
First card,
Oh,
1973 Toyota Corolla.
mm,
Celica, not Corolla. Toyota Celica. Still love it to this day.
great. You don't still have it, do you?
No, I wish I did.
Um, any superstitions?
Only superstition was, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, if my big thing was, like if I went and had lunch one day, had a big game that night, well, I was going to eat at that same place until I had a bad night or not a good night. But that's the only thing I really would do superstition wise. And I wasn't really locked into that, but I was a big believer. If something ain't broke, don't fix it. And so,
One of the guys told me when I interviewed him, his superstition. I guess he was. Uh, the biggest thing was not trying to be superstitious. So anything that happened, he would do different just because he didn't want to be superstitious. So he's superstitious about not about being superstitious.
now that's funny. I really wasn't superstitious, but if I was in a slump, let's just say, the place that I had the most success after eating at was TGI Fridays. So if I was in a slump, I can guarantee you I was looking for a TGI Fridays to have some chicken fingers and a club sandwich and a chocolate milkshake, I promise.
There you go. So did you have a favorite pitcher you like to hit against?
Oh, wow. I would say my favorite pitcher was a lefty with Chicago, Steve Wilson. He actually did pretty well, but I had a lot of success against him in the minor leagues, and it carried over into the big leagues. But either him or Dennis Cook. I don't know if you remember Cook. He was a minor league teammate of mine, and in the big leagues with the Phillies and Dodgers, I wore him out, and I gave him a lot of grief about that too.
So, I'm from Kentucky, the bluegrass state here. So I always end this interview with asking, have you ever heard of bluegrass music?
Oh yes, oh yes. I'm not a big music guy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my oldest daughter lives in Louisville. I told you Kentucky, so I'm looking forward to coming up there to try a little bit on that bourbon trail. But she lived in Nashville for 2 years, and I'm just not a big music. Just eh, you know, I work out. I don't have headphones with music in, but I appreciate music and listen. But I'm not a big music guy.
Well, if you make it to Louisville and try the bourbon, make sure you make it to Eastern Kentucky, and we'll fix you up with some Dr. Pepper.
Yes, and you told me what that is, and I would certainly love to try some.
We'll do it. Appreciate it, Greg. Appreciate you being on here doing the interview. And everybody, thanks for watching. And we'll be back in touch, Greg.
My pleasure, Dave. Nice meeting you, and loved being on.